A protest to remind those in power, especially the Trump administration, that no one is above the law.
Many people across the United States are protesting against what they say is the expansion of presidential powers, against immigration crackdowns, and against the war in Iran that many here fear is spiraling without a clear endgame.
This is the third No Kings protest since President Trump came to power. There's been over 3,000 events in all 50 states on Saturday.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. David here, bringing you the latest updates. Let's look at the massive events unfolding right now. A third wave of an ongoing, structured resistance has brought millions of everyday citizens onto the streets, united entirely by a single catchphrase: No Kings. This is far from a temporary demonstration destined to dissolve overnight. Instead, we are witnessing a fast-moving uprising spanning countless metropolitan areas, generating crowds so enormous that federal lawmakers can no longer brush them aside as a radical minority. Their core point is straightforward, piercing straight through the media's political narratives. The public firmly believes that the chief executive has stepped over the boundary, dividing a democratically chosen representative from a much more perilous figure.
We do want to give you a live look at some of the other rallies we're seeing around the country. This is D.C., looking at our nation's capital. You can see lots of folks out there, joining this demonstration. We see different flags that are flying out there, and a big crowd out there in D.C. I believe we have a look at a couple of other cities. We're going to take a look at New York City here. We have a different view than we had last time. We're able to kind of be on the ground there, walking with the people who are participating. And Rebecca, you just see different signs.
Prominent international broadcasting networks have focused their lenses directly on these turbulent American thoroughfares. The visual evidence is absolutely profound. Throughout New York City, massive assemblies extend across multiple avenues, forming an endless ocean of citizens marching with total unity of intent. The exact same reality is playing out across Los Angeles, Chicago, Philadelphia, and within the heart of Washington, D.C. as well. The National Mall, a hallowed ground traditionally defined by historic struggles for human liberties and campaigns against unlawful military conflicts, is once more overflowing with people practicing their core First Amendment protections.
At the site of Renee Good's death, songs and prayers, and a minute of silence.
This is beyond unacceptable. This is inhumane.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you.
Another video of the incident has emerged, this time from the phone of the officer who fired the gun.
The particular complaints driving these millions of citizens into public areas cover the entire range of the White House's most divisive initiatives. Foremost is the execution of border and immigration policies, an issue that has assumed a devastating and profoundly intimate character. The identities of Renee Nicole Good, along with Alex Pretty, are now central slogans for the resistance. Both were born and raised U.S. citizens whose lives ended prematurely amidst a federal border enforcement sweep in the state of Minnesota.
Let's get an update now on the volatile situation in the US city of Minneapolis. The senior Border Patrol commander, Greg Bovino, who has been at the centre of the Trump administration's aggressive immigration enforcement surge.
Well, Gemma, what's happened here? There's quite a change in tone and personnel by President Trump. 3 weeks ago, as we know, there was a 37-year-old woman, a mother of three, was shot dead by an ICE officer in the same city, in Minneapolis,
for the deaths of these American nationals. Furthermore, the issue of military conflict has sparked deep indignation. On this subject, the United States Constitution leaves no room for ambiguity. The exclusive right to initiate warfare is granted solely to the United States Congress. In spite of this, the executive branch initiated a massive military intervention without ever requesting or obtaining the consent of federal lawmakers. This escalating hostility involving Iran, originally marketed as a rapid and definitive display of domestic military superiority, has devolved instead into an intractable swamp. United States military personnel have lost their lives, while the primary geopolitical goals are still completely unmet. Meanwhile, skyrocketing fuel costs, serve as a constant, grueling indicator of the war's financial toll, imposing immense stress on ordinary working-class households who are forced to buy expensive fuel just to commute to their jobs and transport their children to class.
Thank you, Ranking Member Blumenthal and Ranking Member Garcia, and distinguished members of Congress. My name is Luke Ganger, and I'm here with my brother Brent. Renee Good is our sister. We're here on behalf of Nay's big family and those who loved her. We're here to ask for your help.
The surviving relatives of Good and Pretty are doing more than just mourning their loss. They are vocally demanding absolute transparency. The broader movement has fully integrated their struggle, displaying their identities and histories as a counter-narrative against the White House's attempts to depict the border discussion strictly as a matter of institutional discipline. The physical toll on human lives, the marchers declare, can no longer be omitted from the political equation. Destroying political effigies with fire constitutes a method of ideological expression backed by centuries of precedent.
We begin with President Trump's new threats on Iran as his 8 p.m. deadline for a ceasefire looms.
Now look at this. In a post to his Truth Social account just earlier today, the president stepped up his rhetoric, saying, quote, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back. That's if a deal isn't reached," adding, "I don't want it to happen, but it probably will."
Now, ahead of that deadline, a new intense wave of strikes.
Furthermore, they fashion a synchronized set of ideas that connects powerfully with diverse populations across completely different parts of the country. They systematically enlist and prepare internal security teams to preserve order and proactively diffuse confrontational scenarios. This high degree of operational expertise points to a resistance that possesses immense longevity, completely independent of the presence of any single compelling figurehead. It has successfully taken root within local communities and retains the capacity to renew its vigor following every major public push. This enduring operational framework represents a massive political force that will outlast the current electoral cycle. It is fully prepared to be refocused on expanding voter registration, driving turnout on Election Day, and forcing politicians to answer for their choices via the democratic process. The financial factors tied to these demonstrations are absolutely vital to explaining why they have garnered such widespread public support. The chief executive's public standing has dramatically deteriorated as the harsh financial conditions of his administration have impacted the populace. The grand pledges of swift financial relief and a rejuvenation of widespread prosperity have completely failed to happen. Rather, everyday households find themselves struggling against stubborn inflation, elevated borrowing costs, and a highly unpredictable employment environment. The emergence of data showing negative employment numbers during a recent monthly cycle caused severe concern among financial analysts, while validating the deep worries of typical citizens that the domestic financial system is on a downward path. Marchers explicitly link these financial difficulties to specific decisions made by the administration. They assert that the armed intervention involving Iran functions as the leading cause behind skyrocketing fuel expenses. They argue that commercial conflicts and aggressive customs tax strategies, a large number of which have been declared illegal by federal judges, have disrupted supply chains and raised costs for businesses and consumers alike. The persistent environment of administrative turmoil and legal friction, they argue, discourages corporations from making capital investments or creating new jobs. This financial suffering is far from theoretical. It presents itself clearly with every single visit to a supermarket and every check of a retirement savings balance. Consequently, activists are transforming this deep financial dread into an explicit political campaign to replace the current administration. The global ramifications of these street actions are similarly immense. The international community is observing these events very closely. When renowned overseas information agencies such as the BBC allocate extensive television slots and front-page coverage to documenting massive demonstrations within the United States, a potent message is broadcast to friendly states and hostile nations alike. It demonstrates clearly that the domestic political framework is undergoing an intense crisis. It reveals that the chief executive's control over the state, though currently protected by law, faces open and massive resistance along public avenues from a huge segment of the public. For partner nations who rely heavily on domestic consistency and predictable global partnerships, these broadcasts are incredibly alarming. They stir up massive doubts regarding the future path of the country's democratic institutions and its moral standing to lead globally. Conversely, for rival nations, the civil unrest serves as a massive ideological advantage. State-managed media outlets can easily point to these events as clear proof that the Western democratic framework is collapsing, arguing that the country possesses zero moral authority to advise foreign states on human rights or free governance. The president, an individual uniquely focused on his personal reputation and the projection of national power, faces intense global embarrassment caused directly by the very population he is supposed to govern. The tangible repercussions of this public movement are already altering behavior within the halls of Congress. Federal lawmakers, especially those representing highly contested political districts, are hyper-aware of the massive crowds gathering outside. They witness the written declarations, listen to the unified shouts, and study the statistical data showing the president's public support locked well under 40% alongside a steadily intensifying resistance. These public displays establish a protective framework for members of the president's own party who have hidden their personal anxieties about the executive's choices, allowing them to finally express their doubts out loud. With millions of voters marching behind a banner that rejects autocracy, a conservative lawmaker can easily rationalize defying the White House by referencing the clear demands of their own local voters. These rallies offer essential ideological shelter, completely upending the traditional assessment of political danger. In a climate where the resistance is highly motivated and the broader public is actively participating, remaining attached to a failing presidency could prove far more dangerous to a politician's career than abandoning it entirely. This widespread unrest is swiftly dismantling the executive's governing alliance, forcing the president's appointed cabinet to formally discuss invoking the 25th Amendment represents an explicit, concrete objective for key factions of the resistance. These demonstrations have expanded far beyond the National Mall and major municipal centers. They are now materializing directly inside the residential neighborhoods of top executive officials. This specific method is engineered to bring the political emergency directly to their doorsteps. It is quite simple to read dry reports regarding public marches in a staff memo, but it is an entirely different reality to personally pass through an angry crowd right outside your front door, forcing your family to hear loud demands that you take immediate action to unseat the president. This type of confrontational, direct action exerts an immense mental impact. It forces executive secretaries to realize that their roles in this government are no longer limited to abstract philosophical debates, but are instead flashpoints for intense ethical and societal conflict. The individual risks have expanded enormously, and for specific cabinet officials who already maintain quiet doubts regarding the chief executive's capacity to lead, this intense local pressure could easily become the final push that drives them to take decisive action. The ever-present threat of civil unrest turning violent remains a dangerous reality looming over every major public assembly. To be clear, the vast majority of those marching do so without any intent to cause harm, gathering solely to assert their basic constitutional protections rather than damage property. Nevertheless, huge assemblies gathered during intense ideological standoffs create severe, unpredictable dangers. The emergence of opposing groups, the infiltration of bad faith actors aiming to incite a riot, or a heavy-handed, uncoordinated response from police units, any singular element could ignite a clash that rapidly grows unmanageable. Should physical clashes take place, particularly ones resulting in severe casualties or deaths, the entire dynamic of the crisis would instantly change. An escalation of that level would generate an absolute public demand for a swift conclusion. Activists view this armed struggle as the absolute embodiment of an autocratically run executive branch. They see a leader who presumes he holds the singular right to dispatch young domestic troops into deadly scenarios entirely on his own whim, completely bypassing open debate, legislative consensus, and institutional responsibility. Furthermore, when statements threatening the total destruction of innocent civilian populations were shared globally, the public recognized the vocabulary of an absolute despot rather than the careful rhetoric of a military leader bound by international humanitarian laws. The financial distress presently burdening regular citizens serves as the foundational catalyst for this widespread public fury. Throughout his campaign, the president repeatedly pledged to lower the cost of living, appealing directly to blue-collar households who found themselves fighting against rising grocery bills, expensive real estate, and basic daily survival. Regardless of those assurances, these identical citizens check their grocery store receipts only to find persistently elevated costs. They witness the digital displays at fuel pumps draining their monthly income, all while media broadcasts reveal details of a $400 million ballroom renovation spearheaded by the chief executive, utilizing taxpayer funds for what looks like nothing more than private indulgence and political rewards. The massive divergence between the official narrative of championing the common laborer and the actual execution of strategies that enrich affluent, elite groups while putting financial pressure on everyone else creates an immense divide that activists are intent on exposing. The likenesses of both the president and the vice president being lit on fire during these demonstrations represent much more than standard theatrical demonstrations. They serve as raw, deeply felt manifestations of the public conviction that the nation's highest executives have broken the foundational oaths sworn to the voters who put them into power. To be polite, the executive branch's reaction to this sweeping display of civic engagement has been entirely contemptuous. Administration officials have labeled the demonstrations as mere psychological venting for people afflicted by an unreasonable fixation. Government figures have even implied that nobody except compensated media figures and hired provocateurs could genuinely hold an interest in these grievances. Such language characterizes an executive branch that has opted to reside within a fabricated reality, an isolated bubble where the millions of U.S. citizens gathering without violence to communicate their problems are viewed as either completely non-existent or entirely fraudulent.